My name is Alara Vance, and on the day I was supposed to be married, the world held its breath. The air in our village of Oakhaven was thick with the cloying sweetness of blooming jasmine and the sharp metallic tang of impending rain. From my window, I could see the vibrant red ribbons my mother had tied to the gateposts fluttering in the restless wind, like fresh wounds against the dusty landscape. I sat perfectly still in the center of my room, a doll dressed in bridal red, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The heavy silk of my gown felt less like a celebration and more like a shroud. "Go outside and take a look," my Aunt Lynn hissed, bursting into the room, her face a mask of pale anxiety. "It's getting so late. Why hasn't the wedding procession arrived yet?" I didn't need to look. I already knew. The memory of this day was etched into my soul, not as a future event but as a past catastrophe. In what I could only describe as a previous life, I had lived through this exact moment. The creeping anxiety, the whispered fears, and finally the shattering humiliation. I had been reborn into this same body with the same name, but carrying the weight of decades of another existence. I was 20 years old on the outside, but inside I was a woman who had lived, loved, and lost everything. "I'm sure there's a reasonable delay, Auntie," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "Perhaps a cart has broken down on the road from Willow Creek." My calmness seemed to agitate her further. She clicked her tongue and hurried back out, joining the growing cacophony downstairs. My parents and relatives were a flock of agitated birds, their voices rising into a panicked chorus. They paced the courtyard, their fine silks seeming absurd against the backdrop of their fear. My father, Alistair Vance, a man whose pride was as solid as the mountains surrounding our village, kept marching to the edge of our property, his broad shoulders rigid as he strained to look down the empty road. With each passing hour, those shoulders slumped a little more. "We've waited for hours," my mother Lillian murmured as she entered, her hand trembling as she tried to adjust a heavy gold pin in my hair that was already perfectly in place. "Alara, my child, don't worry. There must be an explanation. Kalen is a man of his word." Kalen Reed. The name sent a cold shiver down my spine, a reflex born of years of accumulated pain. In my first life I had married him. I had entered his family with a dowry my parents had spent years assembling, a fortune that included a valuable courtyard house in Northwood. I had been the perfect daughter-in-law to his demanding mother, the patient guide to his frivolous sister, the invisible engine that powered his rise from an ambitious village boy to a powerful, wealthy man in the city. And what had it earned me? A husband who grew to resent my competence, who blamed me for his own shortcomings. In his later years he had brought his childhood sweetheart, Seraphine, into our home, flaunting her in public while his mother and sister told me to be understanding. The final memory of that life was of my father, a retired soldier who believed men should bleed but never cry, weeping silently in the night after reading another gossip column about Kalen's exploits. He had died with his eyes wide open, and a part of me had died with him. So no, I wasn't worried. I was grateful. A secret, wild joy bubbled within me, so at odds with the devastation unfolding around me that I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. This was my second chance. The disaster that was about to befall the Vance family was, for me, a miraculous deliverance. Eventually, several groups of our relatives were sent to the neighboring village of Willow Creek to ask around near the Reed family home. The wait after they left was the most agonizing for my family. The festive music had long since died away. The plates of uneaten food sat on long tables, a silent mockery of the celebration that would never be. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, cruel contrast to the gloom that had settled over our household. When the scouts returned, their faces told the story before their mouths could form the words. My uncle, his face ashen, walked straight to my father and spoke in a low, urgent whisper. I saw my father's face transform. The anxiety melted away, replaced by a thunderous rage that I remembered well. He slammed his fist down on the wooden table in the courtyard, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "They've backed out," he roared, his voice trembling with fury. "The Reeds have backed out of the wedding. That snake Kalen. That wretched family. This is a deliberate insult." The courtyard erupted. Cries of shock and anger filled the air. My mother crumpled onto a stool, weeping openly. Right there and then, my father gathered a group of our strongest male relatives and the matchmaker, a flustered woman who was wringing her hands in despair, and stormed out towards Willow Creek to demand an explanation. I remained in my room, finally standing to look at my reflection in the polished bronze mirror. The girl staring back was beautiful, her face unlined by the grief I carried. I slowly began to remove the heavy headdress, the gold pins, the layers of jewelry. Each piece felt like a chain I was unlocking. They returned hours later, long after night had fallen. Their rage had been replaced by a weary, humiliated defeat. The Reed family's gates had been shut tight, my father reported, his voice hollow. No one had answered their shouts. They had been made to look like fools standing outside a silent house. The emotional and physical exhaustion was too much. That very night, both of my parents fell ill, their bodies succumbing to the shock and shame. By the time I was reborn into this moment, I had arrived a bit too late to prevent their collapse. Seeing them lying weak in their bed, their faces pale with sickness but still etched with worry for me, my feelings were a confused whirlwind. There was sadness for their pain, but an overwhelming, undeniable joy for my own liberation. While the household was in chaos the next morning, with aunts and uncles debating what to do next, I slipped away. I changed into a simple, unadorned dress and walked to the town center, to the small official marriage registration office. In my previous life, I had forgotten a necessary stamped certificate on the wedding day. A kind female clerk had smiled and told me to leave the documents, that she would complete them later so I wouldn't have to travel back and forth. I had given her a piece of milk candy from my pocket in thanks. Now I walked into that same office. The same woman was there, her expression softening with recognition and pity. News traveled fast in a small town. "Miss Vance," I heard. "I am so sorry," she said. "It's all right," I said, my voice steady. "I've come for the marriage application. It won't be needed." She hesitated but saw the resolve in my eyes. She retrieved the folder containing the paperwork that would have bound me to Kaylin Reed. I took it and the unstamped certificate, my hands trembling not with sadness but with triumph. "Thank you," I said, bowing deeply. As I straightened, tears did roll down my cheeks, but they were tears of relief. On the hired cart ride back to Oak Haven, we passed a remote alley on the outskirts of Willow Creek. A familiar figure caught my eye. It was Kaylin, holding Seraphine tightly in his arms, looking ecstatic. Even from a distance I could see his lips moving. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew them. In my past life he had later confessed this moment to me, boasting how he had chosen love over duty. "Seraphine, this time I won't let you face it alone. I'll take responsibility as the father." She blushed, glowing with affection. But then her eyes, flickering around, met mine. A panic flashed across her face. I turned away coldly, no longer paying attention to the man who had been the villain of my past life. He always believed the baby Seraphine carried was his. Only she and I knew the truth. It wasn't. The child belonged to her university professor, a married man who had abandoned her. Kaylin was merely her desperate, loyal fallback option. Seeing them together now instead of causing me pain only solidified my resolve. That life was over. My father, once he recovered from his illness, was riddled with guilt. He had favored Kaylin from my two main suitors, saying the boy was destined for greatness. He had been right in a way. Kaylin did achieve greatness on the back of my family's wealth and my unwavering support. But I didn't want that kind of greatness anymore. I thought it over carefully. In this world, women were still expected to marry. I needed a safe harbor, a dependable partner. And I knew of one. When I told my father I wanted to marry the other suitor, the one he had considered too quiet and unambitious, he was completely stunned. "Sweetheart, let's really think this through," he said, his voice weak from his sickbed. "There's no need to tie yourself down to just these two men. We can find you someone else. Someone worthy." But I shook my head firmly. "Papa, it's him. Just ask him if he's willing to marry me." His name was Silas Thorne. Thinking about my past life, I wasn't entirely sure he would agree. But I had a hope. Back then, when Silas had heard I was marrying Kaylin, he had rushed to our village, arriving drenched in sweat just as the non-existent procession was the talk of the town. He had seen me standing there in my red wedding dress, a vision of humiliation. His eyes, dark and deep, had met mine for a long, painful moment before he had turned and left without a word. 4 years after, I received anonymous gifts and money transfers. I had eventually traced them to the remote garrison where Silas was stationed. The transfers stopped after 10 years. I had thought he'd moved on, but decades later I learned the truth. He had died in the line of duty. On his tombstone next to his name was a simple inscription, "My eternal love, Ilara." Some people cast me aside like worthless glass. Others used every last breath of their short lives to love me fully. The day after I spoke to my father, I saw him. Silas Thorne was standing stiffly at the edge of our property watching our house. He had been there on and off since the failed wedding. In my past life, this was the day he had turned and walked away forever. In this life, for some reason, he had stayed. I walked out to meet him, my simple dress a stark contrast to the bridal finery of 2 days prior. "Silas," I said, my voice clear. "Looks like today is your unlucky day. I want to get married and you're still single. So I guess it's you and me." He looked at me, his sharp, serious features unreadable for a moment. Then, slowly, a grin broke across his face, softening his entire countenance with a warmth I had never seen in him before. "Not unlucky at all, Ilara Vance," he said, his voice low and sure. "I couldn't be happier." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, a deliberate and happy chaos designed to erase the stain of the failed wedding. To escape the whispers and pitying glances in Oakhaven, my parents and I moved straight into the courtyard house in Northwood that had been my mother's dowry. It was a beautiful, spacious property that had sat untouched for years, a silent promise of a future that had now radically changed. In my previous life, this very house had been a point of contention. Kaylin's sister, Amaryllis, had desperately wanted to study abroad, and Kaylin, after initial objections, had pressured me relentlessly to sell it. I had eventually capitulated, the funds financing Amaryllis's dreams and Kaylin's early business ventures. Years later, when I tried to buy it back, the price was astronomical, and Kaylin had deemed it not worth the investment for you. Now my mother had the deed transferred into my name. It was to be the foundation of my new life with Silas. The house was decorated not in the ostentatious red of my first wedding, but in warm, welcoming colors. Silas and I had a simple, heartfelt ceremony at the marriage registration office. There were no grand processions, only our immediate families. Both sets of parents wept, but these were tears of relief and joy. My father, still frail, clasped Silas's hand with a gratitude that needed no words. What came unexpectedly was that right after our small wedding lunch, Silas received an emergency summons from his military unit. His face fell, etched with regret. "I have to go. I'm so sorry." He looked genuinely anguished, as if expecting me to be disappointed. I just smiled softly. "It's your duty. I understand. I'll be here when you return." Before leaving, he did something that stunned me. He handed me a small locked metal box. "This is everything I have," he said, his voice gruff. "Savings, deeds to the small piece of land my parents left me. It's yours now." He then proceeded to give me instruction after instruction about the house, about taking care of myself, his words tumbling out in an uncharacteristically anxious flood. Watching him, this strong, silent man so flustered at the thought of leaving me, my heart swelled with an affection I hadn't known was possible. I stood on my toes, gently kissed his cheek, and then pulled back. "I'll wait for you to come home." His eyes darkened with emotion. In one swift movement, he wrapped a strong arm around my waist and pulled me close, his voice a whisper against my ear. "Okay." That single word was a vow. Then he was gone, leaving me in the quiet of our new home. I had made up my mind to give Silas all of my loyalty and trust in this life. I would be a better wife than I was before, calmer, more at peace, free from the resentments that had poisoned my first marriage. What I didn't expect was that the Silas who returned from his mission 2 weeks later was nothing like the reserved man I remembered from my past life. He was different. The silent, brooding soldier was replaced by a man of surprising warmth and, I soon discovered, a fiercely passionate and affectionate nature. The first night of his return, I learned that my new husband was not the stoic figure I had anticipated. He was attentive, yes, but also boldly possessive in the most delightful way. He seemed to crave physical contact, his hand always finding mine, his arm slung casually over my shoulder. And in the privacy of our bedroom, he was insatiable. The first week of his return, I barely left our room for more than meals. He was a man possessed, as if making up for every moment of our separate pasts. At one point, overwhelmed and pleasantly exhausted, I kicked him away in mock frustration. He just laughed. A low, rich sound caught my ankle and pulled me back towards him, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Not a chance, Mrs. Thorne. After we married, my parents and his parents decided to move to Northwood to be near us. They bought neighboring houses next to our courtyard. To my delight, my mother and my new mother-in-law, a retired schoolteacher named Clara, became fast friends. The four of them created a joyful, bustling circle around us, playing chess, knitting, cooking together. They never interfered, only watched over our new marriage with quiet, loving eyes. Lately, however, I noticed a very clear change in the food on our dinner table. Stir-fried eggs with chives, spicy pork kidney stir-fry, goji berry chicken soup. Dishes renowned for their invigorating properties. My face grew hotter every day and I kept my head lowered during meals. But Silas, thick-skinned as ever, was in the mood to critique the food. Mom, the soup's a bit salty today. Dad, that fish you caught tastes a little muddy. Next time, keep it in clean water for a couple of days before cooking. No matter what he said, both sets of parents just nodded and agreed happily, beaming at him as if he'd just recited profound poetry. Silas, smug and cheeky, leaned over and whispered in my ear, "See? Thanks to you I can ask for anything. If I wanted the jade rabbit from the moon, I bet Dad would figure out a way to catch it for me." I blushed and shyly pinched his side, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned his face closer. "Sweetheart, how about a kiss right here?" he teased. "Every time I go on a mission, I rely on these feelings to keep me going." While I waited peacefully at home for his return from shorter duties, I began to receive care packages and letters from him at the same time every month. They were not the formal, stiff letters of a soldier, but overflowing with love and a surprising playfulness. Dried wildflowers from mountain trails, intricate seashells from a distant beach, stunning photographs of landscapes he thought I'd like, each accompanied by a note. "Elara, the flowers blooming on this mountain aren't as beautiful as you. Elara," I whispered, "I love you into this conch shell. Can you hear my voice? Even the clouds in the sky look like your silhouette. I miss you. I love you." Silas had every part of my life arranged so carefully and securely that I no longer needed to run around managing a household like I did in my previous life. I didn't have to worry about groceries for an entire clan, a sister-in-law's grades, or what herbal medicine my mother-in-law needed each day. I didn't have to get up early to serve anyone or stay up late to clean up after others. For the first time in either life, I was free to simply be. I had a gift, a pair of skillful hands inherited from my maternal grandmother. No matter how intricate a pattern or sewing technique, I could understand it at a glance and reproduce it exactly. In my past life, this talent had been co-opted by Kaylin. His boss, a powerful woman, loved clothes from foreign magazines, and Kaylin had volunteered my services. I had spent countless sleepless nights, even after childbirth, creating perfect copies for her. This patronage had been crucial to Kaylin's success, a debt he never acknowledged and quickly forgot. Thinking of all the good Silas had done for me, I felt a desire to return the favor. I learned that Silas's commanding officer had a mother, a graceful old lady, who adored the history of Suzhou and Hangzhou embroidery. Seizing a rare opportunity before a formal dinner, I worked tirelessly for days, crafting a few exquisite pieces for her. When I presented them to Silas before the event, his reaction was not what I expected. His eyes reddened and he pressed his lips together tightly as if holding back a wave of emotion. "Elara," he said, his voice rough, "I'll earn my own future. I married you to give you happiness, not to make you work for my advancement. Believe me, I can do this. You just focus on what you want to do. If making clothes is your passion, I'll support you. Just don't do it for me. That should never be a burden for you." I looked at his warm, vibrant face, so full of life and integrity, and remembered the solemn, grieving photo on his tombstone from my past life. I couldn't find the words. My heart was so full it felt ready to burst. But all I could do when I opened my mouth was gag and heave. I was pregnant. The news hit Silas and both our families like a tidal wave. Shocking, dizzying, and overflowing with pure joy. My in-laws left for their ancestral home in the countryside that very night to kneel before their ancestors and give thanks. I heard later that Silas's father had shouted, "Thank you for blessing this unfilial grandson. Silas, he's finally done something useful." Before heading back to his base, Silas, ever shameless, had bragged loudly, "Old man, you're the one who should be kneeling. Without my wife, our family line would have ended right here." Before he could finish, his mother chased him out the door with a feather duster, laughing and scolding in equal measure. Silas returned to his post, his chest puffed out with pride. Far from distancing themselves, my in-laws threw themselves into taking care of me. When they heard that free-range eggs from the countryside were more nutritious, they rode with my mother all the way back to Oakhaven to buy some. That evening I was resting in the courtyard when I heard my father's booming voice from outside the gate, furious. "Goddamn that little bastard. I'll kill him." A cold dread washed over me. I knew with a certainty that chilled my bones, exactly who he was talking about. The cold dread that washed over me was a familiar ghost from my past life. It was the feeling of Kaylin Reed's drama, like a toxic fog, seeping into my new, pristine world. My father, Alistair, burst through the gate, his face a thundercloud, with my mother Lillian and my in-laws Clara and Robert Thorne trailing behind him. Their expressions were a mix of fury and concern. "Goddamn that little bastard," my father roared, slamming his hat onto a nearby table. "First he runs away from the wedding and humiliates us. Now he's got the nerve to let his family ruin your reputation too. He's looking for death." My mother, trying to calm him, turned to me, her face etched with worry. "Alara, honey, we ran into Kaylin's mother in Oakhaven. She had the audacity to ask why you hadn't brought Kaylin his medication lately. She said his prescription had run out. And then his sister Amaryllis piped up, asking why you hadn't sent her monthly allowance." The sheer, breathtaking gall of it left me speechless. In my previous life, I had indeed taken care of all of Kaylin's minor ailments and funded Amaryllis's extravagant tastes. They had grown so accustomed to my silent support that even after their betrayal, they felt entitled to it. "Good thing you didn't marry him," my mother fumed, her gentle nature finally overcome by anger. "That whole family's rotten. A nest of ungrateful snakes. Kaylin used to seem so quiet and ambitious, but who knew he came from such shameless stock?" She sighed after a sip of water, her eyes flicking nervously toward my mother-in-law, Clara. "Your mother-in-law overheard everything. She was holding a basket of eggs and didn't say a word. But I'm worried, Alara. We never hid what happened, but hearing that their daughter-in-law was left at the altar, it can't sit well. If Clara speaks to you harshly these days, please just bear with it. All right. Your dad and I can tell. Silas is a good man. This will pass." My father got even angrier. Why should she have to endure anything? My daughter didn't do anything wrong. Worst case, she divorces him. I'll take care of her and the baby myself. The atmosphere in the courtyard turned heavy and silent. Their love for me was a palpable force, but it was tangled with fear. Fear that my past would poison my present. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Would Clara tell Silas? Would he look at me differently, thinking I had married him on the rebound as a last resort? The joy of my pregnancy was suddenly shadowed by the specter of Kaylin Reed. With those worries weighing me down, I tossed and turned all night, my mind conjuring scenarios of Silas's disappointment. When I finally woke the next morning, I noticed an unusual silence. Clara hadn't brought over her customary breakfast congee. I wasn't sure if I felt disappointed or relieved. What struck me as odd was that my parents weren't home either. Before I could collect my thoughts, I heard a loud commotion outside the gate. It was the sound of many voices, my father's booming above them all. "This time we're letting them off easy. But if they start running their mouths again, I'll break that boy's damn legs. Uncle, we're coming with you. Silas isn't home right now. He left Alara in our care. If we can't even handle this, what kind of family are we?" That was the voice of Silas's cousin, a burly young man named Marcus. "Alara is such a good person. And that which had the nerve to spread rumors about her," another voice chimed in. "Next time I see that gossiping daughter of theirs, I'm going to rip her mouth wide open." Then I heard Clara's voice, laced with sudden panic. "Oh no. I forgot to make Alara's meal. What if she goes hungry? All your fault. I told you we should have come right back after buying those eggs." That was Robert, my father-in-law. "Where's the hen and the eggs I bought? Who's holding them?" "Right here, Auntie. The eggs are perfectly fine. Not a single one broken." I rushed to the gate and threw it open. There they stood, my entire family, blood and by marriage, looking flushed and triumphant like a returning militia. Clara's hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a fierce, bright light in her eyes I had never seen before. In her hands she clutched a basket of eggs protectively. When she saw me, her expression softened. I didn't hesitate. I rushed forward and hugged her tightly. She later explained, her voice trembling with residual anger, that she hadn't taken the Reed woman's words to heart. The reason she hadn't retaliated on the spot was purely practical. "It's hard for hens to lay eggs in the winter," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She'd gone door to door just to gather enough to nourish you and my grandchild. I wasn't about to drop them in the dirt because of that hag's lies." The moment she had brought the eggs home safely, she had told Robert and their relatives. They had all gathered, Fences and Thorns united, and marched straight to the Reed household in Willow Creek to reclaim our dignity. They had torn through the property not with violence toward people, but with righteous fury, smashing a few pieces of furniture and shattering the lock on their gate. They had then reported the slander to both the local police and the village chief. Under pressure, Kaylin's mother had finally broken down and admitted that her claims, that Alara had already slept with my son, were all lies made up on the spot to save face. My mother-in-law, the retired schoolteacher, had completely abandoned her usual elegance. "I grabbed that woman by the collar," Clara said, a hint of pride in her voice, "and I slapped her across the face again and again. I shouted with each hit, 'Alara is such a good child. Your son didn't know how to treasure her. If I ever hear you slandering her name again, I'll tear your mouth apart myself.'" She shoved a few $100 bills into my hand. "This is your reputation compensation from that old hag." Then she handed me a signed letter. "And this is her written apology and guarantee." The police, when they arrived, had apparently been bemused by the scene, saying the Reed woman was sobbing that Clara must have been possessed. "Don't you be afraid, Alara," Clara said, pulling me into another hug. "Silas may not be home, but your dad and I will protect you. You're our daughter now." When my parents returned, having heard the news, they were shocked and filled with regret that they hadn't been included. They scolded the Thorns, asking why they hadn't been taken along. But Clara waved them off proudly. "This is our child. We'll handle our own business." In that moment, the last vestiges of my anxiety dissolved. I was not an outcast from a shamed family. I was a Thorn, protected, cherished, and fiercely defended. The knot in my stomach loosened, replaced by a warm, solid certainty. My past was truly behind me. The Reeds could no longer touch me. The rest of my pregnancy passed in a blissful, protected bubble. Silas's letters became more frequent, filled with excited questions and silly names for the baby. He managed to get leave just in time for the birth. I gave birth to a daughter, a beautiful, healthy girl with my eyes and her father's serious brow. We named her Willa. The joy she brought to our families was immeasurable. She was the first grandchild on both sides, and she was spoiled absolutely rotten. Silas, the fierce soldier, melted into a puddle of goo whenever he held her. He would sit for hours just watching her sleep, a look of such profound wonder on his face that it made my heart ache with happiness. When Willa was 2 years old, Silas received orders for a long-term transfer to Ethelberg, a bustling city thousands of miles away. It was a promotion, a significant one, but it came with a difficult decision. My parents and his parents couldn't bear the thought of being separated from Willa, and she had grown so accustomed to the doting attention of all 4 grandparents that the thought of taking her from that environment felt cruel. After many discussions, and after asking a 3-year-old Willa who firmly stated she wanted to stay with Gamma and Gampa, we made a heart-wrenching choice. Willa would stay in Northwood with our parents. I would move to Ethelberg with Silas. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Saying goodbye to my daughter, even knowing she was in the best possible hands, felt like tearing a piece of my soul out. But Silas needed me, and I needed to build a life with my husband. We promised to visit as often as possible, and for the first year we traveled back every few months. In Ethelberg, in the quiet of our new apartment when Silas was on duty, I found myself at a crossroads. The life of a military wife could be lonely. I thought about my skillful hands, but the memory of sewing for Kaylin's gains still left a bitter taste. I couldn't bring myself to pick up a needle. One day, wandering near the base hospital, I saw a poster advertising evening classes for a nursing degree. The image of a steady hand holding a scalpel reminded me of the graceful precision I had once admired in a doctor who stitched my ankle in my past life. A spark ignited within me. That evening I talked to Silas. I think I wanted to go back to school. To study medicine. His face lit up with immediate, unwavering support. That's a brilliant idea, Alara. You have a calmness and a precision about you that would make a wonderful doctor. Let's stick to your gift. If you can't hold a sewing needle, hold a scalpel instead. Whatever you want to do, I'll support you. And so I enrolled. While raising a child long distance with the help of our phenomenal parents, I buried myself in textbooks. The discipline and focus came naturally to me, perhaps honed by a lifetime of managing a chaotic household. I excelled. I earned my degree and applied for a transfer to work at the base hospital in Ethelberg. The day I received my official acceptance letter was one of the proudest of my life. I was no longer Alara, the discarded bride or the devoted wife. I was Alara Thorne, medical practitioner. It was on my first official day of reporting for duty, standing at a bus stop in my crisp new uniform, that the past decided to pay one last unwelcome visit. The bus stop was a simple concrete slab under the vast, smoggy sky of Ethelberg. I stood there, my posture straight, the insignia on my uniform feeling both foreign and right. I was waiting for my brother, Evan, who had moved to the city a year prior and was giving me a lift to the hospital on my first day. A sense of proud anticipation buzzed under my skin. This was my new beginning, earned by my own hands. Then I saw them. A sleek, expensive car pulled up to the curb a short distance away. The doors opened and out stepped Kaylin Reed and Seraphine. 5 years had passed, and it was clear Kaylin had taken some advantage of his second chance at life. He was dressed in a sharp, modern suit, his hair styled expensively. Seraphine clung to his arm, wrapped in fashionable silk, her face carefully composed. They looked every inch the successful urban couple they had always aspired to be. When their eyes landed on me, standing alone at the bus stop, I could practically feel the wave of superiority that washed over them. Kaylin's face tightened with a familiar mix of contempt and possessiveness. He strode over, Seraphine trailing nervously behind him. "Ilara," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "I just sent out a package 3 days ago and now you're already here. You've been following me, haven't you?" The absurdity of the statement was so vast I couldn't even form a reply. He was still trapped in the delusion that he was the center of my universe. Without waiting for a response, he flicked a business card toward me. It fluttered to the ground at my feet. "Enough. I'm not in the mood for games. Come to this address tonight. I've got something for you to do." It was a command, not a request. Seraphine's eyes flickered with something, fear? Guilt? She bit her lip and shot me a bitter glare, as if I were the one intruding on their perfect life. Before I could utter a word of dismissal, they turned on their heels and got back into their car, speeding away with a spray of gravel. A few minutes later, my brother Evan pulled up, drenched in sweat and breathing hard. "Sis, so sorry. There was an urgent issue at the firm. Am I late?" I smiled, the tension melting from my shoulders. "I just got here myself. Perfect timing. Let's go." As I got into Evan's car, I casually scooped up Kaylin's business card with the toe of my shoe and flicked it into a nearby trash can. It was a gesture of finality. The past was garbage and I had no intention of keeping it. I threw myself into my work at the hospital. The chaos of the emergency room, the meticulous nature of diagnostics, it suited me. I found a satisfaction in healing that I had never found in tailoring. Sterling and I built a quiet, happy life in Ethelberg, our reunions with Willa during holidays filled with laughter and joy. We never once spoke of the Reeds. They were a closed chapter. But Kaylin, it seemed, was not done reading. A month into my new job, I was running an errand during my lunch break when a sweet, familiar voice stopped me. "Miss Thorne?" "Alara." It was Seraphine. She was alone this time, smiling a brittle, overly bright smile. "I've been hoping to run into you. When you didn't come to the office, I figured you must have lost the business card. Can we talk? Just for a moment? Over coffee." I was exhausted by the whole thing. I had no idea what they wanted, but a small, stubborn part of me wanted to end this harassment once and for all. I agreed, following her to a nearby cafe. She ordered an expensive Brazilian brew, her movements delicate and practiced. "Ilara," she began after a sip of coffee, her voice laced with a forced gentleness. "Kaylin and we have a child now. A son. He's 4 years old. His name is Koa." She hesitated, then laid her cards on the table. "What happened in the past was our fault, I admit that. But love itself isn't wrong. We really hope you can find it in your heart to give us your blessing." So that was her game. She was trying to retroactively legitimize her timeline, to make me believe she'd had Kaylin's child after their marriage, not before. She had no idea that I knew the truth about Koa's parentage. Before I could respond, a small boy who had been sitting quietly at a nearby table coloring began to cough. It wasn't a normal cough. It was a tight, wheezing gasp. My medical training snapped into focus. I saw his lips beginning to turn blue. I rushed to his side. He's having an anaphylactic reaction. What did he eat? I demanded, checking his airway. It was swelling rapidly. Seraphine, who had been the picture of composed elegance moments before, dissolved into a panicked damsel. Koa. My baby, she screamed as Kaylin, who must have been waiting nearby, rushed in. He had a bite of the mango tart. Seraphine wailed, collapsing into Kaylin's arms. I told her, Kaylin. I told Alara over and over that Koa is allergic to mangoes. How was I supposed to know she would intentionally give him one? The lie was so brazen, so perfectly calculated that it left me momentarily stunned. Kaylin's face transformed into a mask of fury. The way he glared at me, I could see him imagining me torn to pieces. You vicious witch, he snarled and charged at me, his hand raised to strike. But I was no longer the Alara who would shrink from his anger. Years of medical training, of caring patients, had made me strong. I caught his wrist mid-swing and pressed hard on a nerve point. His face went white with shock and pain. This isn't a joke, Kaylin, I said, my voice cold and steady. Your son is dying. You have no idea what med students go through. Now shut up and get him to a hospital. Now. The commotion drew attention. An ambulance was called and we all descended on the hospital. My hospital. While the doctors worked to save Koa, I stood in the hallway trying to calm my racing heart. I hadn't even had time to step away before Seraphine grabbed my sleeve, weeping hysterically, demanding an explanation. Then, like a bad play, the rest of the cast arrived. Kaylin's mother, his sister Amaryllis, their faces contorted with drama. Oh, my sweet grandson, his mother wailed. This is killing me. Amaryllis glared at me with pure hatred. You never could stand to see him happy. Kaylin held a sobbing Seraphine, whispering comforts. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, then buried her face in his chest. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Apologize to Seraphine right now, Kaylin ordered me, his voice trembling with rage. I had no patience for this circus. I am a doctor at this hospital, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. And you are causing a disturbance. Leave or I will call security. As I turned to go, he grabbed my arm. At that moment, a group of young interns rounded the corner, led by a bright-eyed young man named Leo. Dr. Thorne? Is everything all right? Leo asked, his eyes wide at the scene. These people are harassing a staff member, I said calmly. Please escort them out. The interns, eager to impress, quickly intervened. As I walked away, I heard Kaylin's confused voice echo down the hall. Wait, did you just call her Dr. Thorne? Leo's voice was proud. Yeah, Dr. Thorne just transferred here. Top of her class from Northwood Medical. She was Professor Chandra's favorite student. The look on Kaylin's face, a mixture of utter confusion and dawning, horrified realization, was the last thing I saw before I turned the corner. He had built his second life on the assumption that I was still the same woman, waiting in the wings for his call. The discovery that I had not only moved on but had built a life and a career that commanded respect, a respect he had never afforded me, was a seismic shock to his worldview. That evening, as I walked out of the hospital, exhausted but clear-headed, he was waiting for me by the entrance. The smugness was gone, replaced by a desperate, wild look in his eyes. Alara, he said, stepping in front of me. You've been reborn too, haven't you? The question hung in the air between us. I wasn't surprised he had guessed. The pieces had finally fallen into place for him. I looked at him with cold disdain. What I am, Kaylin, is none of your business. You have. I know it, he insisted, his voice rising. You've known all along. You knew I was about to meet Director Gao. You knew she only liked your clothing designs. You wanted to watch me struggle, didn't you? You wanted me to beg. He was spiraling, his entitlement laid bare. Don't lie. I'm doing all of this for our future. Quit this job. Start sewing again. Help me rebuild everything. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was breathtaking. He still saw me as a tool for his ambition. You're delusional, Kalen, I said, stepping around him. He grabbed for my hand. You can only marry me. You belong to me. Before I could react, a familiar, strong hand wrapped around mine, lacing our fingers together. I turned and there was Silas striding toward us, his face a thundercloud. He must have returned from his exercises early. I am her legally recognized spouse under national marriage law, Silas said, his voice low and dangerous, his entire body radiating a protective fury. Who do you think you are to question that? He completely ignored Kalen, his eyes only for me. I thought you weren't coming back until tomorrow, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. He lowered his head, his voice softening only for me. I missed you. I rushed back overnight. Behind us, Kalen was still screaming, but Silas's security detail, who had been trailing him, materialized and held Kalen back at a distance. I could still hear his fading shouts. She belongs to me. Silas rubbed my fingers gently and sneered in the direction of the commotion. What a delusion. Then he led me away, his arm around me, shielding me from the ghost that had finally, definitively, been laid to rest at the hospital door. The ride home was quiet. Silas didn't press me for details. He just held my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles in a steady, calming rhythm. His presence was a fortress, and I felt the last of the adrenaline from the confrontation with Kalen seep away, replaced by a weary gratitude. He's been reborn as well, I finally said, my voice soft against the hum of the car engine. It wasn't a question. Silas nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. I gathered as much. The way he spoke, it wasn't about a past engagement. It was about a past life. He glanced at me, his eyes full of a deep, unwavering understanding that still had the power to astonish me. It changes nothing, Alara. Not for me. Tears pricked at my eyes. He had accepted the impossible so easily, his focus solely on what it meant for me. He thinks I've ruined his plans. That I owe him a future. Silas's jaw tightened. He owes you a lifetime of peace. And if he can't give you that, he'll answer to me. I believed him. The look in his eyes was not that of a hot-headed boy, but of a man who would methodically and permanently remove a threat to his family. It should have frightened me, but it only made me feel safer. The next few weeks passed without incident. I heard through the grapevine, the efficient gossip network of a military hospital, that Kalen had been seen loitering near the hospital grounds, but security had been alerted and gently but firmly encouraged him to move along. I focused on my work, on my letters and video calls with Willa, and on building my life with Silas. Then one crisp autumn afternoon, as I was leaving after a long shift, I found him waiting for me again. This time he was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a haggard desperation. His clothes were rumpled and his eyes were red-rimmed. Alara, he said, his voice raspy. He didn't try to touch me, just stood there, a broken figure. I was wrong. I was too arrogant. I realize it now. Please, come back to me. He was crying, actual tears streaming down his face. The sight was so pathetic it was almost pitiable. Almost. We were married in our past life for so long, he begged, his words tumbling out. We had a son together. A son who was just like me. So smart. He should marry me. We have a history. I don't care that you left him. I'll take you back. I'll marry you properly this time. I looked at him, my heart as cold as the evening air. This was the core of his delusion. He couldn't comprehend that the history he cherished was my nightmare. Kalen, I said, my voice calm and final. When you ran from our wedding, I was relieved. When I woke up in this life, my biggest fear was that I had already married you. The moment you bailed, the first thing I did was go to the registration office and withdraw our application. He froze, utterly stunned, as if this simple logical act was a betrayal beyond comprehension. I've been married to my husband for years, I continued. We have a wonderful daughter. He's sweet and clever. She doesn't have to play mediator between her father and grandmother. She's loved completely by our whole family. She has a life I could only have dreamed of for her in our past life. He tried to smile, but it was a twisted, ghastly expression. Alara, he said, his eyes pleading. I admit I was wrong. I only wanted to cool things down for a few years. I never meant to lose you. I wrote to you every year, but I just found out Seraphine was secretly taking the letters. It wasn't my fault. Please just give me another chance. Think about our son. The mention of that son, the one who had inherited his father's selfishness and disdain for me, was the final straw. The pity I might have felt evaporated. Kaylin, the truth is, you just can't let go of what I brought to the table. I could manage your home and build your professional network. You only realized your perfect dream girl wasn't so perfect after all, and that no one made a better wife than Alara Vance. And that son you keep mentioning. I let the ice seep into my voice. I'm glad I don't feel anything for him now. He was just like you, selfish, cold, always demanding the world bend for him. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Whether you admit your mistakes or not makes no difference to me, I said. In our past life I fulfilled every duty as a wife, a mother and a daughter-in-law. Marrying into the Reed family was the most revolting mistake of my life. You have no idea how many days and nights I spent drowning in regret. By the end, even seeing your face made me sick. And that includes right now. It was as if I had pulled the final support from a crumbling structure. His face collapsed. The disbelief, the entitlement, the very foundation of his second chance, crumbled to dust. He sank to his knees on the pavement, mumbling to himself, How could this happen? I felt no triumph, only a profound and weary disgust. I turned away from him, this ghost of a man who had haunted 2 lifetimes. Kaylin Reed, I said, my back to him. Don't ever appear in my life again. You wouldn't want to know how my husband handles his enemies. I walked away and didn't look back. After that day, Kaylin and his entire family disappeared from my world. It was as if a fog had lifted. Silas, when I told him about the encounter, had that dark, dangerous look in his eyes again. So what? He'd grumbled, pulling me onto his lap. You actually felt bad about me roughing him up? I rolled my eyes, kissing the frown line between his brows. Idiot. He's not even worth 1 strand of your hair. Sacrificing your future over someone like him would be beyond foolish. He was easily placated, turning soft and smug like a great lion being scratched in just the right spot. Life settled into a deep, satisfying rhythm. I thrived at the hospital, eventually specializing in internal medicine. Silas continued his distinguished career, his reputation for integrity and brilliance growing with each passing year. We visited Willa as often as we could, and those times were filled with a joy that was simple and pure. Much later, I did befriend the woman Kaylin had been so desperate to impress, Director Isolde Gao. Not to offer her handmade clothes but as a colleague. She suffered from severe asthma, and during a routine checkup, I gently reminded her of some crucial precautions she had neglected. The advice, born from my knowledge of her future health scare in my past life, resonated deeply with her. She was profoundly grateful. During one of our conversations, she shared a story that made me smile, a sad, distant smile. She told me of a former subordinate years ago, who had been obsessed with gifting her flamboyant, ill-fitting clothes. He was so desperate to impress, she said with a sigh. But he had no taste, no understanding of what I liked. It became so tiresome. I eventually had him transferred just to get some peace. She then mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that she'd heard the man had tried his hand at business in Ethelberg. He had used loan sharks to fund his ventures, but every project failed. He was not a man people trusted. I heard he lost everything, she said. His mistress left him, and apparently she left a letter confessing that the son he'd raised wasn't his at all. The poor man's mother had a stroke when she found out and passed away. And he vanished. Sat by the river one day, they say, and was never seen again. I listened, nodded politely, and then forgot about it. It was a story about a stranger. It had nothing to do with me. My life was full. Silas missed Willa terribly, and we often talked about having another child to fill the space when she was away. But one night, as we lay in bed, I quietly broached the subject again. He pulled me into a hug and smiled. We made a deal, remember? Just 1 child. Boy or girl doesn't matter. 1 is enough. They'll have all of our love. He kissed the top of my head. Alara, besides you, I can only love 1 more person. Any more than that and I wouldn't know how to split my heart. And so we grew old together. He defended the nation. I saved lives. Our love was not a dramatic flame, but a steady, enduring sun, warming every corner of our lives. The decades unfurled like a well-worn, beloved map. Silas and I built a life that was the very antithesis of my first one. It was not without its challenges, long separations due to his postings, the constant ache of missing Willa during the school year, the stresses of my medical career. but every challenge was faced together with a foundation of mutual respect and unwavering support. Willa grew into a remarkable young woman, smart and independent, with her father's quiet strength and thankfully neither of her parents' penchant for drama. She split her time between Northwood and Ethelberg, cherished by all her grandparents until their peaceful old age passings. The courtyard house in Northwood became her sanctuary and eventually her home. Silas never lost his mischievous, affectionate side. Even as his hair silvered and his face etched with the lines of time and responsibility, he would still pull me onto his lap when he thought no one was looking, still whisper teasing comments in my ear that made me blush like a young bride. Our love story was written in the quiet moments. In the cup of tea he would bring me during late-night studies, in the letters we still exchanged whenever we were apart, in the way his hand would automatically find mine whenever we walked side by side. He defended the nation with a quiet brilliance that earned him the deepest respect of his peers and subordinates. I found my calling in medicine, eventually becoming the head of my department. I never picked up a sewing needle again for anyone but my family, but I held a scalpel with a steady hand, saving lives and mentoring young doctors with the same patience my grandmother had shown me. We never had another child. Silas remained steadfast in his belief that his heart had room for only one child besides me. Will was enough. He was more than enough. He was our greatest shared joy. When Silas finally retired from active service, we moved back to Northwood, to a smaller house near Willa and her young family. Our days were filled with the simple pleasures we had missed for so long, tending a garden, spoiling our grandchildren rotten and taking long, slow walks through the familiar streets of our youth, now changed almost beyond recognition. Time, the great equalizer, softened our bodies but never our bond. We grew old together, two halves of a whole, our lives so intertwined that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. When Silas passed away at the age of 82, it was peacefully in his sleep, lying in my arms. Our children and grandchildren were gathered around the bed. There was no struggle, no pain. He simply took a quiet breath, sighed, and was gone. His hand was in mine until the very end. The grief was a physical ache, a vast, silent emptiness where his vibrant presence had been. But it was a clean grief, untarnished by regret or bitterness. We had loved fully and been loved completely in return. There was nothing left unsaid, no moment wasted. In the days that followed, as I began the heartbreaking task of sorting through his belongings, I found a small worn leather book on his bedside table. It was a collection of poetry, its pages soft with age. Tucked between the pages of a sonnet about enduring love was our wedding photo. We looked so young. I was smiling shyly, my head tilted towards him. He was looking straight at the camera, a hint of that proud, smug grin playing on his lips, his arm possessively around my waist. We were just children on the brink of a life we could never have imagined. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in his strong, familiar script, written with ink that had faded slightly with time but was still deep and clear, were the words, "Alaire, my eternal love." Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude. Some people are cast aside like worthless glass. Others use every last breath of their short lives to love you fully. I had been given the incredible gift of a second chance, and I had spent it with a man who was my eternal love. I lived for several more years, surrounded by my daughter, my grandchildren, and the love they carried for the formidable gentleman who had been my Silas. I would often sit in the garden he had planted, the sun on my face, and feel his presence as strongly as if he were sitting beside me. When my time came, it was with the same peace that had taken him. I closed my eyes, the image of his grinning, youthful face clear in my mind, and the feel of his hand in mine as real as it had been on the day we married. I had lived two lives. One of duty and sorrow and one of choice and profound joy. I had no regrets. Only thanks. The end.